Our first speaker in the last session is Karan. Go. And I'd like to introduce the man as somebody who is synonymous in India with everything green, everything sustainable, and connected to traditions and ideas about timelessness. Karan is a wonderful character. I actually found a quote. He's so well known in India, and I found a quote from India Times newspaper, which is saying that in between globetrotting for presentations on sustaining the nature, he manages to live the life of king size while espousing many causes, including fundraising, campaigning for greener buildings, greener environment. With those words, I'd like to introduce the man who is basically standing up out from this cafe. Over to you, Karan.
I bribed them, to say it. I love you. I had to pay for this. Many glasses of wine. I said, when I come out, could we have, I just called to say I love you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sisa. It's SISU. I just called to say I love you. It's wonderful to be here. I came with my family a few years ago on a Baltic cruise. And I was sitting alone in the square 2 days ago. And I SMS'd my two sons that I'm missing you. And they said, Dad, is that Indian restaurant Maharaja still there? And it was. So they said, go in and say hello. So I went in foolishly and said, hi, do you remember us? We came 7 years ago. And, they were so desperate to get me in. They said, of course we remember you. Welcome back. I live in a very small city in Baroda. And it has the population equivalent to that of Estonia. But in India is considered very small. I have been trying to design my house for the last 39 years. I have designed 14 houses on 16 plots and I haven't yet finished. So until the time I have my own house, I live in a small rented house. And my landlady lives in America. And she says, you can't make any changes in this house. So that was the parking lot, and this was the driveway, and that was the porch. So I said to her, can I put a few paintings in the porch? And she said, why would you want to do that? And I said, can I grow a little bit of greenery in where we park the car? So that is the little bit of greenery. These are the little paintings. And that is the house that we have slowly taken over. I also practice. I've been 40 years as an architect. And I will explain to you later in the talk on how I learned my architecture in this extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary 2,000-year-old buried city, which I was working with my mentor for 30 years. So that was where I learned my architecture. This is my office, very similar to my house, and that's sort of the entrance area. That's the studio at the back, and this is where I sit. I have come to the conclusion that to be an architect is not about architecture, it's about changing lives. And for the last 40 years, I've been working with traditional craftsmen, people who make terracotta murals, rugs, and stuff like that. And now there are, in many cases, very, very few families, 2 families in one case, 4 families in another, 6 families. And when these families die, the tradition is going to die with them. And I just feel that if in my practice I can help sustain them, it would be great fun. So a lot of the stuff that you see in the office are experiments in trying to sustain these traditions. And I remember that 30 years ago, I went to a village with a Danish lady who had come from this part of the world. And she was trying to explain to the women in this village on how to make carpets and rugs, and I was with her for about a month in this village. And I told an old woman, I said, when I get my first project of a hotel, I'll come back and give you some work. And then for 37 years, never got a hotel project. And just got one the other day. And when we signed the contract, I told the client, I said, let's go buy rugs. And he said, but you haven't done the design, you haven't shown me any sketches. I said, no, but let's go and get rugs. So it was a 75-room hotel. We ordered 250 rugs, went back to that village. And that woman recognized me and said, it's taken you a long time to come back. But it changed the life of those 200 women. And that is what I keep doing. I'm going to, this is, my office is on a small river. And I have 32 crocodiles. I make sure that every meeting of with my new clients is at 4 o'clock, because all these 32 crocodiles come out and sun themselves, and I take my clients to the window and show them these crocodiles, and they always ask me one question: what do you feed them? And I say, clients who don't pay. And in the last 39 years, I've had only one defaulting client. So that's been quite successful. I have 32 of these guys. I've given them names. I'm going to begin where I think Keys ended. When he said that he talked about beauty, comfort, and sustainability. I have also used Vitruvius, and I have deliberately changed the word that the purpose of architecture was to create delight by saying it must create joy. I also come from this very old-fashioned world where when we talked about space, there was no question of interior, exterior, architecture and all. It was all one. It was the design of space. I'm going to speak to you about the fact that a lot of the work we do is determined by the culture we are in, or the culture where we are from, because culture really defines you and enhances your life. Spaces are for people. They tell stories, like my home and my office. And I'm going to add this word to Keys's words of beauty, comfort, and sustainability. I'm going to talk about inspiration. And of course, what I've been talking about for the last 40 years of my life is sustainability to increase productivity. I'm going to talk about wellness. And this is a very new concept which is just being spoken about in the United States. And I want to share with you what I know about it, and the fact that we should not really deplete resources. So when you say space, this word, whose definition has been argued over almost as much as God. And therefore, you will understand when I easily tiptoe around the topic by posing another question. Do we have the right to define space? Or does nature define space? You see, it's an interesting question because nature has been around for 4 billion years, while humans haven't even passed 250,000. Nature has spent billions of years evolving and adapting, and we as mankind took 194,000 years to invent the wheel. So, however, ironically enough, mankind has the ability to change the face of nature, to recreate space and change environments. Many people have used this quote, and I don't want to feel left out, so I'm going to use it too. We design spaces, and after that, spaces influence our lives. Anyone, and Suzie talked about this yesterday, she called it the interior, but anyone here who has ever driven through the heartland of a nation probably recognizes this view. A straight road with nothing but fields on either side, boring for what feels like eternity. And yet, if you look at that same place from a different perspective, would you feel the same? Or are we amazed by the intricate use of space, or horrified by the waste of space? Equally, could be said by these people enjoying a spring afternoon in the city of love? Do they truly understand the space that surrounds them, the space that influences them as they walk down every street or around every corner? Are we truly aware of our surroundings? And furthermore, are we aware of our impact on our surroundings? For far too long, there has been a disconnect between architectural space and interior space, creating structures with dual personalities. I asked Keys to fix this slide for me. This building was straight and these two buildings were upside down, and Keys said, "Let me do it for you." And he straightened the two on either side and left the one in the middle upside down. So I'm going to leave it with that, because I think we are creating structures with dual personalities, and maybe Keys had a reason to leave it like that. Habitats like this one, which are constantly in conflict, and designs that have no identity. And this is where I'm going to bring in culture to talk about the kind of identity that we were striving for, and the kind of identity maybe Estonia should after the leftover Russian rule. How do we get to this place where we design out of necessity, void of all ingenuity and cultural expression? In India, our culture is one of the world's oldest, formed not by a single history, but an eccentric amalgamation of centuries. Different regions have their own distinct cultures. Language, religion, food, architecture, and art in India is different wherever you go. The very design of a place is different because it has adapted to its environment over millennia. So therefore, if you go to Goa, the Portuguese influenced design aspects of that area, like the British impacted influences on Bombay, and the Mughal impacted on Rajasthan. And as you can see, that the three architectures and therefore their interior spaces and the quality of their interior environments are quite different. So, in many ways, Indian culture is in actuality a fusion of the ages. Our heritage is so deeply rooted within our culture that it influences society as well. It is respected for its tradition, valued for its insight, and honored above all else. We do not live amongst our past, but instead think of ourselves as an extension to our past. It is this connection which has had a profound effect and impact on our society as a whole. It has provided us with rich culture based on tradition, which is a rare commodity in much of the world today. And however, it could also be said to have shrouded and colored our judgment in ways of mass consumerism. Many of our historical treasures, and you saw lots of pictures like this yesterday, have been lost to designs not suited to their environment, just as it has affected other cultures around the globe. Luckily, we are now redefining our culture for the better. Gone are the days where we were thinking about space without thinking of place. I'm also going to talk about the architecture and interior of place and not space. And once again, we are creating space rooted in the culture and context in which it belongs. And I think this is something that Estonia also must do and is doing, that the work that you're doing has to be rooted in a context and a culture to where it belongs. A trend that is echoing through the fabric of human society. This new society that we have has now firmly entrenched in a movement focused on environmental impact, waste, and building performance, while simultaneously dedicated to form and functionality. Our built environment has benefited greatly from sustainable design. Not only has it shown us a better way to build, but it has consciously and simultaneously propelled us to focus on the connection between our environment and the functionality of buildings and their interiors within that environment. Not as separate entities, and this is a very important point I wish to make, but as equal. So I'm not even getting into this conversation about interior and exterior and architecture and design. I'm saying they are not separate entities, but as equals. And as Keys talked and showed us the Charles and Reim's house, I want to also quote this couple and Charles Eames. You know, when we got our independence from the British, our Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who you may have heard about, got this couple to come to India to start what he wanted to call the National Institute of Design. And we have a lota. A lota is a little brass vessel in which you collect water. And Charles Eames said, look, this is your identity. And based the whole idea or the concept of design on the concept of a lota and built this incredible institute called the National Institute of Design. And here I also want to quote him, choose your corner, pick away at it carefully, intensely and to the best of your ability, and that way you might be able to change the world. And this is what I strongly believe, that we are actually able as architects and designers to change the world. I'd like to also quote Wright when he says that the lack of culture means what it has always meant, ignoble civilization and therefore imminent downfall. So I was going to tell you this story about culture, and I'm coming to this, that when you invest, you get progress, but when you have culture and investment, you have responsible progress. And I had a friend in the World Bank, the President Wolfenson, who talked about cultural heritage providing vital resources for economic regeneration, as well as Klaus, founder of the World Economic Forum, said that we must engage in the broader social and environmental concerns of our time. And this must be part of our work. As Keys said, it's not that we talk about sustainability as something else, it must come into every single thing that we do. I got into this funny situation when I reached Baroda. I'm from Bombay. It's a big city. So I get to this small city. I'm going to study architecture for 5 years. And I am a swimmer, and I swim for India. So I make a beeline for the swimming pool. And there's a fat, gross, tall man, and he is an archaeologist. And he has obviously not seen a swimmer like me, and is very enamored with the way I swim, and says that, look, why don't I come with him every afternoon to a little place 40 kilometers away from where I'm going to stay, and he is going to share with me 30 years of his work of a buried city 2,000 years old, which nobody is bothered about. So we go every day. In the morning, I'm taught an architecture which is completely irrelevant to India, from a textbook which is English, printed in 1904, and this is in 1969. I know about dormer windows, Corinthian columns, Doric columns, and do not know about courtyards and the screen and the jali and introverted spaces. And then I go with my mentor to this fantastic city in the forest, and come back at 9 o'clock at night, absolutely revitalized at this enormous city, which nobody used to go and see. There were him and me for about 3 years. And is there anyone who's 23 years old in the audience? Is there someone who's 23? Is everyone older than that? Okay, so I was 23. And he said to me, can I give this to you? And I thought that was a dumb question. I said, sir, you can't give this to me, it's not yours. So if you are going to give it to me and I'm going to say I'm going to take it, it's equally dumb, so I'm not taking it. And then he comes back to me 6 months later and says, will you give me 30 years of your life? I said, that's easy, my life. Shook his hand. I said, for 30 years of my life. Now what do I have to do? I was 23, I would have been 53 when I had fulfill my obligation. And he said, why don't you make Champaner a World Heritage Site? So I said, fine. Good evening, sir. And thank you for coming. He says, come tomorrow morning and I'll give you 30 years of my work. And I go the next morning to get 30 years of his work, and he has died at night. But he has got a huge black trunk, and in this black trunk, he's put 30 years of his work and written my name on top of it. So at 23, I inherited 30 years of work of R.N. Mehta, and I just didn't know what to do. I was not an archaeologist. And then spent 30 years trying to document this city. It's extraordinary. Just look at these structures. To make way to get to these structures, he had identified 29 buildings. I found out that the President of the United States has a satellite which he used eventually to track Saddam Hussein and this other guy, Osama. And this is such an incredible satellite that if you're going out in the car, if I have my hand outside the window, it can tell you the watch I'm wearing and the time. So I wrote to him saying that, could I have a satellite image of this place? And eventually he sent me a satellite image, and we discovered 114 buildings, which you can now see. And these are the quality of the buildings that have now been exposed for you to see. And exactly 30 years later, was able to make this a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And that is the President of India, and that is Narendra Modi, who is now the Prime Minister, and they came to the site for putting the plaque of this World Heritage Site. So that's where I learned my architecture, and it was all about local materials, sustainability, Indian practices, screens, courtyards, wind catchers, wind coolers, and an architecture of place, which is very important. And, I've been often called the champ of Champaner, but it is these little kids that I'm really now training to look after their incredible site. At the same time, President Clinton visited India, and he said that why didn't we as Indians look at sustainability, and introduced us to this new idea of LEED, L-E-E-D, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and invited a few of us to America. And I remember going to meet the Secretary of State, and I was jet lagged. I had done Baroda, Bombay, London, Washington, and I get to the Secretary of State's office, and he says, what would you like to drink? And I'm not a clumsy person, and I said, coffee. And when he gave me the coffee, I spilled the coffee on his table. It went right across his table. So he cleaned it, and I got a kick under the table from the minister saying, now you just keep quiet and don't ask for coffee again. And he said, what can I give you? And I said, sir, I'd like a cup of coffee. And he kept saying to me that there is something in this whole LEED platinum that doesn't apply to you. He said it once, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5th time. And I said, if it doesn't apply to me, why the hell do you keep talking about it? And what is it that doesn't apply to me? And he said, this platinum award, no one in the world has won it. So I said, it's a terrific idea. Why don't you give me your visiting card? And he said, what will you do with my visiting card? And I said, when I win it, I'm going to invite you, because you will not be Secretary of State, because President Clinton is leaving office next year. And we won it. We were the first architects in the world to win the US Platinum Award for green buildings. And that is the building that won it. It was a very small building. It's on a very beautiful site. That's the president again, Kalam. So that's the green building. We were able to save 20% of energy on air conditioning systems. That's a wind tower. We were able to save 50% on energy costs. 88% of the building was daylit, 80% was recycled. We saved 35% water, and this ultimately became the greenest building in the world. It has been the most visited green building in the world. The reason I just show this to you is because I feel that everything I learned in this building, I had actually learned at Champaner. And I was trying to interpret Champaner into this building. And then I got provoked by the former President Clinton, and he said, could you take a non-green building and retrofit it? I think this is what Keys was also saying, that a lot of the buildings that you need, you already have. It's maybe correct in the state of the United States and Europe that 70% of the buildings that you need in 2030 you have, whereas 70% of the buildings that India needs in 2030 have yet to be built. So, but let's look at this building. It was a horrific building. It was, we were trying to copy and ape the West. It had glass on all sides. It was completely not green. And I did this interior for the ABN AMRO Bank. It's an international bank, so it has criteria of the interiors being the same, so there's not any too much interior design. But the very fact that we looked at glazing, we looked at night pollution and sensors, reducing water, energy, and so forth. And ultimately, we won this award, which was again the first platinum in the world for interiors. And the only reason I'm sharing it with you is that you have to look at issues like this. Let me just give you an amazing statistic that out of 7,000 components, dyes, which make up carpets and fabric, 6,930 are toxic. So everything in this room is toxic. This is toxic, that is toxic, this is toxic. So if we were to sit in this room for the next 2 weeks, you're not going to feel so great. No, it's true. So the fact is, and I'm not criticizing this. I'm not being critical at all. So please don't get upset with me. I am saying that this happens with all our interiors. So it's something nice to know. And the fact that you have such beautiful old buildings, that would it be possible to actually restore and give them a new life? So this was a friend of mine who got into the habit of finding old palaces and abandoned forts and then would restore them lovingly and convert them into hotels. So once he did that, and I used to see what he was doing, I got into this bug and found this abandoned building near Pune, which is north of Bombay. And we had this little helicopter drone, which is as big as my hand. And we used to fly it on our sites and then take pictures and then work on the pictures. So that is the fort. We made drawings of the fort. And that's what ultimately we did. We made a very nice 40-room hotel within the wall so that it wasn't really seen outside, as you can see here. And that's the restored building. So if we can give new life to old buildings, it would be really quite something. I think this respect for old interiors and giving back and giving new life to them is an enormous idea in the idea of sustainability. We're doing this very large project for the government of India, and there were these two old buildings, this building as well as this building, and they wanted to build the new Parliament House in Patna. Patna the state is Bihar, and they said you can break the buildings, demolish the buildings, and you can make a new complex. And I thought that would really be a waste of money because the buildings were very beautiful. So I built my building in the middle and linked up all the buildings. So that's the project. It's a 67-acre site. It's a very beautiful site. And my building sits in like that in the center and is connected. And I have saved and given new life to these two buildings. We are just being shortlisted as I speak to you for the new Parliament House in a new state in India called Raipur, Naya Raipur. And that is the building that we plan to do. The access is about 10 kilometers away, where you come in on an axis, and that's how the building is going to sit. And we were trying to put all the ideas that we had on identity, on the use of green roofs, on local materials, on the use of water for cooling, for air conditioning, and not having ugly cooling towers, and try to reflect this in the work of our Parliament building. I want to share with you, in my experience, 10 ideas on building good. I'm not going to use the word sustainable because we get into an argument. I'm not talking about, I'm just saying to build good. And my first thought is to sit lightly on the earth. And by this, it is also applicable to interiors, that to do as less as you can to intervene, to try to maximize what the building offers to you. So this is a project that we are doing, art center in a 100-acre site, and we are trying to use the land as much as we can. This is also the new Museum of Mankind and Heritage in Bombay, in a 200-acre park where we are using the building where children can actually climb over it and as part of the landscape. The second idea is the idea of passive design. Is it possible for you to use as less intervention as it is possible? For example, this is a house a friend of mine has done just outside Bombay, and these are screens, and we know that when hot air goes through a screen and it expands, it cools, it's called the Venturi Effect. So this building is naturally cooled. This is an image of a of a place in Sindh, which is now in Pakistan, where you have these wind catchers. So there's a wind catcher. The wind is then channeled into your house. There is an earthenware pot which has water in it. It goes over the pot. It sort of absorbs the water. It becomes heavy. It falls. And when it starts falling, it goes down and it loses the heat to the walls of the building. And by the time it gets down, and we've used this in our new building in Bangalore, and you'll be surprised that by this experiment, we have been able to reduce the ambient air by 11 degrees Celsius. So from 40 degrees, we brought it down to 29 just by spraying water. And then from 29, we have cooled it to 24 or 23, whatever the occupants want. So can you use the idea of passive design? And when you use passive design in the beginning, the active systems get reduced, and when you ignore it, actually the building cost increases, as the inverted pyramid shows you. This was done, I think, again, by two Finnish or Danish students who came to Bangladesh. And they were students who built this school. It's a handmade built school of mud and thatch and bamboo. It was made by the students, the teachers, and the parents of the students who came into the school. It has also recently won the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, and it has actually changed the lives of these young kids. Whenever I go to the United States and I talk about sustainability, I'm always told that, look, we have the answer. Technology has the answer. Now, what was the question? There is this arrogance that they have the answers and they don't even ask the question. So I was getting a little bugged with this attitude, and I said, okay, let me just see that if I were to find out how I can cool a building with design without technology, let me just try to measure it. So we had this building which we were doing, and we looked at, that is the energy you need in a building, and that is, kilowatts per hour, per meter square, and that's the orientation. Obviously in India, if you're facing north and south, you get no heat from the north and south, and you can keep east and west small so that you don't get heat from the east and west. And as you can see, just by construction assemblies, roof and courtyard shading, we are able to reduce the energy. And I came to the conclusion that 50% on the saving of energy of any building, 50% is actually on design and design criteria, which means without the use of active technology. Of course, then you use stuff like efficient chillers and so forth, and lighting and LED, etc. But 50% can be achieved just by design, which is something we decided. The idea of orientation, of course, if you try to keep away from east and west, and in this case, that was north, and that was the main road. So we oriented all our buildings facing the north and south, as we did in this project. And you'll find that it's, again, north and south orientation, southwest, the wind direction, courtyards and wind catchers, coolers. The idea of a slim building. I find that we can bring in natural light by about 7 meters from the north. So if you have a building approximately 15 meters wide, which is about 45 feet, you can daylight your building from 7 in the morning to 7 at the night without the use of any electricity, which is wow. And then after every 45 feet, if you introduce some idea of a courtyard like we've done, the floor plate can be as big as you like, but then you start bringing these courtyards. So whether it was this design center that we did, or that office building, or our building, or this building, the idea of slimmer buildings, because if you have a fat building, the center of the building will always be dark. The concept of the screen, again, it's very simple. Is hot, is cool. You bring your lips together and you breathe out, the same hot air that was coming out before cools immediately. And this is the Venturi effect. So we're doing this hospital and using the idea of screens. So can the idea of screens be used and to bring back cooling? So this is the climatic skin of the building. And this building was selected in the Roots exhibition in Japan. And we were nominated as one of 14 architects for this millennium in terms of global architecture. So that's the Roots exhibition at the Fujita Vente Museum in Tokyo. The same idea that Jean Nouvel has used as his Institute in Arab Studies in Paris. In fact, the Pritzker Prize that he won for this building. And that is an aperture, like a camera aperture. And this goes bigger and smaller depending on the quality of light outside. If it's too much light, it becomes small. If it's too less light, it becomes larger. But the concept of a screen to bring in and to monitor the use of light, and therefore to monitor the use of heat. Can we reduce the materials which absorb heat? In my country, there is a lot of use of concrete. So can we use technologies where structures are made in brick? Can we use jack arches, anything to reduce the quantity? Like you really had these in olden times in the area. That's the building that I'm doing for my wife's school. It's a handmade bricks that we're making on site, and her school for deaf children has just been completed. So the possibility of working with materials, and that's a house I've just finished, which won an award, the use of brick and detailing in brick, and the use of courtyards and a microclimate within the building. The idea of zero waste. You do not know what you waste until you quantify it, and you'll be shocked at what we waste every day. So if you look at your dustbin when you come back from shopping and you see the absolutely huge copious amounts of plastic, which things are wrapped in, rewrapped in, which you carry it with, it is quite shocking. So we did this building for Indira Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister of India. And this was the Institute of Plasma Research, where we recreated the center of the sun, 100 million degrees Celsius inside the building to create plasma, and from plasma to create energy. And we use these 240 fountains spraying water 8 feet high as a 1,300,000 liter water body in the middle of the building as an alternative to the cooling tower that you have for the air conditioning. There are some plants which the roots of the plant can purify water. So if you take grey water from your toilet and pass it, and we have this called the root zone, and pass it through the roots, you actually can get a clear water for the use of landscaping. And you can't drink that, but you can certainly recycle the water. I've talked to you about the idea of 100% daylight. We had 88% in this building, but now we have 100% in all the buildings that we are doing. And this is just a case where in a house where we have skylights in the toilets, and these lights don't be put on in the day. When you build and when you do interiors, there is an incredible amount of carbon emissions that you generate, and you have to be aware of it. It's embodied energy which is coming within the product you're using, and energy that you are using to do that interior or exterior. So what we do in all our projects, we identify areas that we are not going to build. And these are very large areas, and we try to make sure that it becomes a carbon-free campus. I think this is something that you should also be alerted to in the designs that you do. I am getting a little disillusioned with this rating system because we are very worried about how the building performs. And I have been talking to the president of the US Green Building, the US GBC, Green Building Council, for the last 5-6 years that, look, there's something we're doing which is wrong. Why are we only talking about buildings? Why aren't we talking about people? And you'll be very happy to learn that he was in India about 2 months ago, and they've come out with a new rating called the wellness rating. And Kees, you use this word wellness. There is now a new rating for people for wellness, and I think it is a fantastic idea. We are trying to make this mandatory in all the projects that we are doing, that for the first time you can actually quantify the kind of rating that you can generate for wellness in people. I just want to touch on this issue of green walls. People say it's very fashionable. Jean Nouvel used it in his museum in Quai Branly in Paris. But it is quite amazing that 1.5 square meter of green actually gives you one person's oxygen for a year. Now that's a wow. If you look at what's happening, it reduces 98 aerial volatile organic compounds. It reduces air conditioning by 20%. It brings down the average temperature by 10 degrees and requires 15 minutes of watering a week. So I think that it is very, very important that we look at areas like this, the green roof, the green wall, and make it really part of mainstream work that we do. So as we step into the future, armed with the ingenuity of the past and present, coupled with modern technological advances, we are in essence rebranding timelessness. Through innovation and creativity, we will inspire and serve as inspiration. We will redefine how we use space, how we see space, and how we interact with space. And as our populations continue to grow, we will once again be forced to rethink how we see space. Can we adapt to having less space? Can we adapt to using less space? Can we build more with less? Or will we negatively impact our quality of life? I believe each of us is now asking these questions. We must start sharing our answers before we once again find out ourselves building out of necessity devoid of logic. And I think forums like this are ways in which we should interact. I don't have a criticism of this forum, but my only regret is that we have not spent enough time talking to each other. There are not enough opportunities where we can exchange after the lecture, when we have tea, when we meet, and if we could do that. Collectively, 100 great minds will always be more productive and more creative than one, though however the power of a single mind is quite astonishing. So therefore, as we perfect our own ideas, we must also share and contribute to collective ideas. While answers to problems in Estonia might not produce viable solutions in India, it might spark innovative ideas to similar problems. After all, timelessness is not embedded within a single society, but instead belongs to all of humanity. And while our cultural differences contribute to our individuality, it is the collective whole of human society that can alone create a positive, timeless impact on space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karan. Well, what a wonderful visual essay and presentation that was. I'm going to create a little space for discussion here, exactly what you were looking for. But I'll ask one question before I hand it over to the audience. In one of your interviews, you mentioned, you describe yourself as a social entrepreneur. And that's interesting because during the last couple of days we've been talking about who are the architects, who are the interior designers.